Continue in Genesis, and I have the chapters were given, the chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. So I hope you had lunch already, because it looks like it will take some time, but I know my time limit, so don't worry. Everybody will have lunch on time. But I have to say that it was a big challenge to have a look on these chapters. At first I said, maybe somebody else should do this talk. We have some good professors here, but then I realized I cannot escape. This is the third time that I was planned to preach in this chapel, and 2 times it was cancelled. So this time it was not cancelled. Maybe I was praying for it, the possibility. Okay, that's all about how fragile and how much we struggle sometimes. Let me read some verses from Genesis chapter 6. And I will read a few verses from these chapters. And as you see, it's a general title. It's not even a title that you can use in homiletics. It's my purpose is ways Genesis 6 to 9 can inform our theology and life a little bit. Yes? So just trying to make an effort to see what can they say to us. Let us read chapter 6, verse 5, to put things in the right context. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Then God gives a command to Noah to build the ark. And I continue from chapter 7. The previous verse, of course, is Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. In chapter 7, then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Verse 6, Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. Then we jump to verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 7th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Verse 17, the flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. Verse 20, the waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground. Chapter 8. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. Verse 6, at the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made, and set forth a raven, and then the dove later on. Verse 13, in the 601st year, in the 1st month and 1st day of the month, the waters were dried from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. Then we continue in verse 20. Then Noah, after they went out of the ark, then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And then in chapter 9, he continues, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Further down, verse 5, now for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning from every beast. From every beast. I don't know how the priest came here, but it's about beast, not priest. From every beast, I will require it, and from man, from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. And then God establishes a covenant in verse 11. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. And verse 18, the sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. He also said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. And this section concludes, after the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. When did we hear this last phrase again? And he died. Now we have Old Testament people here, and it's Vayamot. Yes, he died, and he died. In chapter 5, where the line continues, the last person dies, then we have the story, the section of Noah, and then the whole section ends with death. Yeah. So it brings us back where he started. First, I will try to describe the passages briefly, and then we will draw some lessons. So two things we will do. Let's do the first thing. A few notes on each chapter. Genesis chapter 6. God says to Noah, build the ark. And we have to remember the context. We see wickedness, violence, and corruption. But Noah walked with God. Here's a man. And he's kind of a very special person because he walked with God. And then we read also in chapter 6 that God was determined to bring an end to this world. To bring an end at that stage. So God reacts on what he's seeing, on the violence that he sees, on the corruption that is there. It's like we have a commentary from chapter 6 to 9 can function as a commentary for chapter 1 to 4, someone said. Genesis 7, then God says, well, build the ark first. Genesis 7, go into the ark. And as we read the passage, there was no one that could escape, all die. And it is obvious that God here uncreates. I was reading on it while I was observing this passage. I thought, well, interesting. And then commentaries helped a little bit to make the connection. It points back to Genesis 1. Chaos is the result of the flood. It's like in the beginning, there was chaos. God uncreates. So it refers us back to Genesis 1. Then Genesis 8, God remembers Noah, and his language is also used, a covenant language. And we see then the spirit, the wind of God comes and helps that the waters will recede. And it reminds us back to Genesis 1, but also further down to Exodus, when another moment God used the wind to help the people go through the waters. So God recreates. And we see the waters in chapter 7 increase gradually. You read the text, and it's obvious that the author tries to make the point. It became quite a lot. It increased, it prevailed, it covered the mountains, it went above the mountains. Uncreates what God created. And now the waters recede, slowly but steadily, and it takes a long time. And God recreates. Then in chapter 9, we see the situation after the flood. Life after the flood. Noah is building an altar and makes an offering. So he is someone who worships God. And he's kind of embarking in his new future with worship. It gives us a picture of the worshiping community that comes later on. He also points to the covenant. Never again God will destroy the world in the same way. Then he says, like in Genesis 1, be fruitful, increase, multiply, fill the earth. Again, the connection with Genesis 1. But Noah also, well, I put there 4 things that we can see about Noah when we read this passage. Well, we see Noah walks with God first, then he worships God, we just saw this, fails God, we read in chapter 9, something not good happened in that tent, and also Ham was involved. And 4th, Noah dies, although he is just starting a new beginning. And then we have blessings and curses. Now this is the passage. This is what's going on in this passage in chapter 6 to 9. And let's see what are the lessons that we can draw. Some of the lessons that we can draw from this passage. Well, first, we learn about God and the human condition. While I was reading the passage carefully many times, one thing that struck me was that God knows exactly what he's doing. There were other gods, Babylonian gods later on, and other mythological gods. They kind of wanted to bring an end, other flood stories, to the world. And the reasons, their motives, were not always the right ones. Perhaps the humans were making too much noise, so let's go down and finish them. Or the gods were saying, well, we need a flood to get rid of humankind, but then they started the flood and they cannot control it anymore. It went beyond their strength. Their power is limited. Or another god comes and sees after the ark, after Noah survives, that somebody survived, and he got mad because he sees the person there and says, it was supposed to be otherwise. So he has limited knowledge. He doesn't know. What do we learn from this passage then? How does the author correct their thoughts and presents a God who is totally different? First, God is sovereign. And his providence, He guides things and directs things. Nothing happens outside of his control. In this passage, chapter 6, 7, 8, and 9, God is in full control, total control. Nothing is outside of his ability to solve. Also, God knows everything. God is not surprised that Noah survived. This was the plan in the first place. We also see that God preserves the line of the seed, the line of the promise. Only one person and his family survives. In chapter 3, verse 15, in Genesis, God keeps his promise. So the God of Moses, the God of the Bible, the God of the flood, as we read it in Genesis, is totally different than any other God, the false gods that were around. Human condition, well, before the fall, it was possible not to sin. Do you agree? Yes? It was possible not to sin. After the fall, it is not possible not to sin. Non posse, non peccare, yes? Not possible not to sin. Since Jesus came, now it is possible not to sin, not to be sinless, but it's possible not to sin. And we look to the future, it will be not possible to sin. But this is still to come. So we are waiting something that God will again do, similar to the flood story, intervene and make all things new. But we are not there yet. It has to wait. So, as Luther would say, we are at the same time justified and sinners. We are accepted by God, but we also are sinners at the same time. What does it say about missions, this passage? How can we draw lessons for missions from the flood? I don't know. Here are some thoughts. First, we have the second Adam in the person of Noah. But Noah fails. He comes out of the ark and he really messes up at a certain moment. The second Adam, Jesus, succeeds. So the second Adam, in the person of Noah, cannot put things right. But the second Adam, Jesus, put things right. Therefore, we have to remember that we are living in the times of the already and the not yet. Don't be too optimistic, Genesis would say, because we are still experiencing the fall. Don't be too pessimistic as well, because we can fix things. We can participate in what God is doing in this world. As German theologians would say, the ultimate and the penultimate. The thing that comes before the end is important. And God gives us the mandate to be involved with caring for the environment and doing all the things. But the ultimate is still to come. So we have to think about the kingdom of grace and the kingdom of glory. And recognize there are different stages in salvation history. And if we mix them, our mission theology may suffer. So until he comes, we have to keep our eyes on what stage we are and work in God's kingdom. The point here is to make sure that we are not too optimistic in a sense that we join utopian errors that promise too much in this world. I had one of my teachers here in Tyndale was Peter Bayerhaus. I don't know if somebody of you know him. He's a missiologist. He was a colleague of Moltmann, but Bayerhaus was more conservative. He was a theologian, a missiologist. And he gave us a course on the theology of mission and the kingdom of God and missions. I remember Arthur Johnston, the founder of this school, came into our class while he was teaching and told us, well, listen to this man. He's the best theologian in Europe and beyond. So I said, well, I have to listen carefully what he says. And he made a distinction between the kingdom of grace and the kingdom of glory. And sometimes we mix them up and put them together. The kingdom of grace is where we are now. God calling people to a relationship with him, gathering the faithful. But there is a moment when the kingdom of glory will come, the ultimate. Another lesson we learn maybe is about our personal lives, about holiness. Think about this. The whole nature of God is against violence and corruption, and he says there will be an end. God doesn't permit sin in that sense. He reacts, and he wants us to live a life that makes sense, that is holy. Think about the flood, a whole flood, to make us more in the image of God, to help us think that we shouldn't play with anything that has to do with going against God's will. Like Noah, walk with God. And the last one is faithfulness. Think about Noah. He's given a task, go and build an ark. And God calls you to do something. Go to Tyndale Theological Seminary and build this school, work on this school. It's a task God has given you, or come here and study. Faithfulness. God has given you something to do, given me something to do. It was his idea that we are here, yes? And he calls us to be faithful. Like Noah, walk with God. Like a refrain in this passage, in these 4 passages, we hear many times, Noah did exactly what God asked him to do. Noah obeyed. Closing with Matthew chapter 6, verse 9 and 10, I was thinking the prayer of Jesus really expresses something from these passages. He said, Father, hallowed be your name. Yes, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And let this be our prayer, to represent God in our generation, like Noah, be faithful to whatever task he has given us. We will close with a hymn.